Hey everyone, so this should be part 2 of 2, so unless there's any requests, this will be the last part of the series because the intention was just to recreate the flagship level from the classic arcade game GORF. So, if nothing else, I really need to do this video to prove that it's actually working. We've got the flagship traveling back and forth, but we don't actually see the damage to the ship or the destruction of the ship. So as you can see, I've added new image. This was just drawn in an external application. Again, I use Anime Studio. You can use whatever you want. There's nothing special about it. It's just a 2D image. It took me like 5 minutes to put together. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an object. So again, the little trick I showed you, have the asset selected, game object, 2D object, sprite, and as you can see, it automatically uses the asset that was selected. So we're just going to put this down here. Now, we will need to eventually check for collision. So we're going to add physics 2D. And we could do the collider. Yeah, let's do the polygon collider, actually. I tend not to like it for more complex shapes, but I think we can make it work. So polygon collider. Let's zoom in. And actually, that looks pretty good. Now, depending on how forgiving you want to be, you might want to pull this line in because you can see it's actually outside of the border of your object. So it depends if you want to be forgiving or not forgiving. So like you can kind of pull this in a little bit. Like I said, when it's a complex shape, relatively speaking, it makes the polygon go kind of haywire because you see these extra lines in here. But I think this should be fine. Like I said, you can be a little bit more forgiving, like maybe take the side here, you can kind of pull this in. That way, if a shot is coming down, I am generally of the position that you make the system be more forgiving than unforgiving. Okay, so that will detect collisions when the enemy starts shooting. So that in itself doesn't do much for us at the moment. We're also going to add a component, physics 2D, and this is going to be the rigid body, 2D, because we need to be able to move the ship around eventually. And then what we need to do is we need to have a shot. So we're just going to reuse this. So game object, 2D object, sprite, and we'll call this shot. What we're eventually going to do, I say eventually, but in a couple of minutes, we're going to turn it into what's known as a prefab. In other words, whereas we want this in the scene to begin with and this in the scene to begin with, we don't want the shot to be in the scene to begin with. We want this to be spawned, or as the term that Unity uses, instantiate. We want it to be instantiated when you press a button. We just need to scale this out a little bit. So let's make this, say, how about too high, but only about 0.3 wide and 1.5. Yeah, I think that's about okay. Now, because this is such a large gap, we'll probably eventually close this in. Well, I won't do it in this series because you know how to do it. You just take the blocks, move them over, and have them be indestructible. The way you can make them indestructible is you just get rid of the code that checks for you get rid of the script that checks for damage. So what you can do is you can take one of these blocks, we'll just click on a random one, but you get rid of this, so it won't detect that it's being hit. The shot is going to have its own script detecting when it hits something. And so, because right now what's happening is this is getting destroyed, but you need the bullet to be destroyed too, or else it's just going to keep going. It becomes like a penetrating shot, and you don't want to do that. So yeah, so in short, you can take one of these blocks, remove the script, and move it over. That way you close this gap if it's too big. Anyways, I kind of jumped ahead. Sorry about that. So here is our shot. So it too needs physics 2D. We'll give it a box collider, and the dots look like it surrounds it nice and cleanly. and then add component, physics 2D. Again, rigid body 2D, so it can have velocity. Now it's interesting, there's a couple things we could do with this. Because it's going from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen, we actually could make this a -1 gravity scale and then not even have to apply any velocity with the script. We'll still have to use a script to detect collision, but the problem with gravity is it will accelerate. So unless you're specifically trying to create a shot that accelerates as it travels, generally you probably don't want that, so we'll just do 0. But I just want to mention that if you do want it to work with gravity, you can do negatives as well, and that would take it from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen. But again, it would speed up. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we have our shot that has the collider. It has the rigid body. We're going to add a script to it. So create C#, and this will be shot con for shot control. We're going to click on shot. And now, just to be clear, this isn't going to control the instantiation because the ship is going to instantiate the shot. What this is going to do is, once it's been instantiated, this will control it. So let's go ahead and open up ShotCon. And what we'll do, again, we'll get rid of the remark statements. It just clutters things up once you know what they do. We want this to happen the moment it gets instantiated, so we'll do start. So get component, rigid body 2D. Again, always be mindful that you're using the 2D version in this project. Velocity equals new vector 2, and it's not moving It's not moving horizontally, it's only moving vertically, and it's moving up. So let's give it like a velocity of 2. Again, it's purely arbitrary how fast you want it to move. But yes, if we use the negative gravity, we would not need this because it would already have its velocity. But again, we opted to not use gravity. Now, outside of start, outside of update, but within the public class, we want to do, again, a check for a collision. So it reminds me, I should really set the bullet to the collider on this bullet and just set it as a trigger. So on trigger, enter 2D. And again, let's get a collision because I think that sounds more functional, whereas we're trying to reinforce that that's the object. So at the moment, we can say that if it collides with anything, it should get destroyed. Now you have to be careful because depending on where the bullet instantiates, if you have it instantiate within this collider area, then that would be a collision and would get destroyed. So we can avoid that by just having it spawn outside of the collision area, but be mindful about that sometimes you can have unintended friendly fire, so to speak. So we'll keep it simple. We'll have it spawn outside of that. So we'll just do destroy game object. So again, this script is attached to the shot object, which means that the shot object is what will be destroyed. And so it's pretty simple. If you don't have to do any checks, if you're just saying a collision has happened, do something, this is actually very easy coding. So we're actually really close to where we need to be. We still need movement for the ship, and we still need to instantiate this. So, but what we can do now is we now take shot, and we drop it in here and turn it into what's known as a prefab. Just moving it here is what makes it a prefab. So how does a prefab difference from the other assets? Because if you open prefab, you can see it's got all its components. And now we delete the shot from the scene. Now what we do we now are going to have the shot be instantiated when we click, say, the space button. I mean, you could do mouse click, whatever, but we'll do space button, it's just easy to check. And let's rename this. We'll call it ship. So now what we're going to do is for the ship, we need to add shot control. So right now we don't have a script for the ship. So right click, create C# player ship. And yes, the naming is really arbitrary. You just can't have a space in the name. Okay, so for our player ship, what we need to do is we need the ship to be aware of this prefab. So we do that via the script. So we drag and drop the player ship script onto the ship. We open it up. Now within the public class, but outside of start, outside of update, we're going to type public transform. You can call this player shot, whatever. Again, we get rid of the remark statements. So watch what happens. So here's our ship object. It's selected in the inspector. When we go down to the script, see this player shot? You can now take that prefab, put it there, and now this object is aware, for want of a better terms, of this object. It can now do things. It can instantiate it. It can modify it. So, go back to our script, and in the update section, if input dot get key down, I believe it's just the word space. So if space is pressed, and get key down means that only for the first frame that it's pressed down. So in other words, it's not a rapid fire situation. If I chose get key, every single frame that the button is pressed, this would execute, which I haven't written yet. Whereas get key down, it happens only for the first frame. Because remember, this happens every single frame, once per frame. So we instantiate, because like I said, when you very often hear the term spawning, okay? Well, in the context of Unity, if you hear spawn, think instantiate. If you hear instantiate, think spawn, because instantiate is the actual command. So for instantiate, there's three arguments: what's being instantiated, where it's being instantiated, and its rotation. So what is being instantiated? The player shot. We just made a reference to that. So the player shot is being instantiated. Where is it being instantiated? Well, we're going to have it instantiate at the ship's location, but we need to be vertically above it. So we can't just say transform.position. We're going to have to break it down into two coordinates. So we're going to say new vector 2. So transform.position dot X, so we're not going to change that, so that's the horizontal position of the ship, but like we said, we want the button to appear higher up. So transform dot position dot Y plus 1. Then comma, and then we will use the player shot's rotation. So if you haven't seen this before, it probably looks a little bit weird, but again, this entire thing is really just one argument. You're saying where it's being instantiated. Transform.position, again, is the position of the object the script is attached to, which is the ship. We said the X position is fine, but the Y position, we don't want it to spawn on top of the ship. We want to spawn it above the ship. We'll probably have to tweak that, but I didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty of decimals yet. It's not a big deal. You just have to add the letter F so it knows it's a float. So I think, if I haven't missed anything, the ship won't move. We haven't put that kind of key control in it, but we have put the shot. Oh, sorry about that. Again, I forgot to get rid of gravity. So for ship, for rigid body, it has no gravity. And we said that we wanted the shot to be a trigger. Is trigger. Okay, so very first shot. Although, oh, you know what we did? We didn't set the trigger as bullet. That's why we didn't get the little you win message here. So, open prefab, tag, shot. So that's one of the, I don't want to call it the dangers, but one of the perils of doing something in advance like that. You have to remember that you already put the coding in place and utilize it. I actually don't want to hit the reactor first shot. I want to see if the other damage works. And it did. Perfect. Now that little edge there, that's because it's not lined up quite right. But that's all in the layout. And there we go. It said you win. So it detected the collision with the reactor. Great. So all that's left is moving the ship. So to do that, let's go back to our script for the player ship, and we're just going to do more input checks. Again, you can use a controller, mouse, whatever you want. I'm just going to use key presses because it's easy to troubleshoot. So if input dot, and we'll use get key rather than get key down because we don't want you to have to keep hitting the button to move. So input dot get key, and let's use A, typical WASD control, will give velocity. So A will be moving left. So get component, rigid body 2D. And yes, I know that using get component repeatedly is resource intensive, but again, for a small game like this, it's not going to make a difference as far as the performance. Just want to throw that out there because someone will say that. I never ever say that my game, what I demonstrate is the best way. I try to choose the way that is easy to explain and easy to understand. So, get component rigid body 2D, we're going to add velocity, new vector 2, and it's going to be like a -2. Again, this is purely arbitrary as far as control, balance, how fast you want the character to move. And this won't be really tight control either. So the reason why I copied and pasted it is because it's really the same functionality. It's just if you're hitting D, then it's positive movement. Now what this does not do yet is, so I press the key and it does the movement. But if I let go of the key, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't stop it. So you need to do if, and the exclamation point is how you say that something is not happening. So input dot get key D and oops, try that again. My goodness, I can't see in this light. and now you need an additional parenthesis because the whole thing needs to be in parentheses. So each check that you're doing has to be in parentheses, and then the whole thing has to be in parentheses. Using input is even more complicated because what you're checking for also has its own parenthesis. So this is saying that if neither one of these are true, then we want something to happen. So this says if this one condition is true. This says if this condition is true. This says if neither condition is true. So this is looking for a single positive. This is looking for a single positive. This is looking for two negatives. And I think I need one more. Oops, sorry. Didn't mean to call up that menu. Yep. And this is another nice thing about Visual Studio. See how there's like gray there and there's gray here? It's automatically letting you know which one it matches to. So particularly something like that, that's a really nice option. So if neither one is happening, then we want there to be zero velocity. Even this isn't really tight control. I'd probably do like an else statement in here. But again, this is meant to be a very simple game. Now, what's nice is when we instantiate the shot, it's looking at the position of the ship. So in other words, as the ship moves, this will automatically adjust. So if I had put in a constant location, it would stop working. It's already looking to see what the current position is. So this movement should not mess up the shot at all. Let's see if I forget anything. So A moves me there, stops, D moves me there, I shoot. Now there's one thing that I know for a fact is not here. There's not a whole lot of limitation on the shots. There's actually no limitation. The only limitation that's accidentally there is if the shot collides with itself with another shot. See how it disappeared? Because I already said that we did not check to see what the shot is colliding with. So if the shot collides with itself, it'll destroy. So you'd want to put a timer in there to make sure that you can't shoot too quickly. Or what certain games do is they let you shoot really quickly, but they limit how many shots. So you can do 2 shots really fast, but then you can't have any more shots until at least one of those shots destroys. So I think that's it. All the functionality is there. Like I said, this doesn't jump to another level when you destroy it because it's a standalone level. There's no full game to jump to, but at least you've carved out the coding where you would put in the code to say, all right, load level 1 or whatever, or load a high score. So I think that should do it. I hope that you found this helpful. It's kind of interesting looking at the old arcade games and then seeing how easy it is to do in a modern day environment. If there's other classic arcade games that you'd like to see, let me know and I'll see if I can do them. So far, I've done Qbert and now I've done the flagship of GORF. So again, if there's any others, just let me know. I hope this has been helpful and I hope you have a good day.